3 days passed before Sarah decided to return to GameZone Battle Hub. The familiar neon glow seemed somehow different as she approached the entrance, carrying the weight of her last visit's events. She had spent those 3 days debating whether to find a new gaming venue or face whatever consequences awaited her return. The arcade was busier than usual for a Tuesday night, and Sarah immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. Conversations quieted as she walked past, players recognizing her from the videos that had already spread throughout the local gaming community. The footage of Tank's swift defeat had been shared across social media, turning Sarah into an overnight legend. She chose a machine in the back corner, hoping to avoid drawing too much attention. But within minutes, a small crowd had gathered to watch her play, unlike the casual observers from her previous visit. These spectators maintained a respectful distance, treating her more like a visiting celebrity than a regular player. Sarah was midway through a particularly challenging match when she sensed someone approaching from behind. She tensed slightly, prepared for another confrontation, but relaxed when she recognized Pete's voice. "Mind if I join you?" Pete asked, indicating the player 2 side of the machine. Sarah nodded, finishing her current game before starting a new match against the arcade manager. Pete's skills were respectable but clearly recreational level, and Sarah found herself holding back to keep their games competitive and enjoyable. "So," Pete said during a brief pause between rounds, "Tank's been doing some research since Friday night." Sarah's hands never stopped moving on the controls, but Pete could sense her increased attention. "What kind of research?" "The kind that involves calling every veteran he knows and showing them pictures from the security cameras," Pete replied. "Turns out he's got a cousin who did 2 tours in Afghanistan, Marine infantry." Sarah executed a complex combo sequence while processing this information. Tank's military connections could complicate things significantly, especially if word reached the wrong people. "And?" she prompted. "And his cousin recognized you," Pete said, pausing his own gameplay. "Or at least, he recognized the techniques you used. Said they were too clean and too precise for regular military training." Sarah's character landed a perfect counterattack, but her focus was clearly divided. "People see what they want to see." "Maybe," Pete agreed, but Tank's cousin used some interesting words. He mentioned something about Tier 1 operators, and suggested Tank might want to apologize for starting something with someone way out of his league. The match ended with Sarah's victory, but she made no move to start another round. Instead, she turned to face Pete directly, studying his expression for signs of threat or judgment. "What exactly are you asking me?" she said carefully. Pete glanced around to ensure their conversation remained private, then leaned closer. "I'm not asking anything. But Tank is outside in the parking lot. Has been for an hour. He's been working up the courage to come in and talk to you." Sarah sighed, recognizing that her peaceful gaming session was about to become significantly more complicated. "And you think I should talk to him?" "I think he's learned something about himself over the past few days," Pete replied. "The Tank who tried to intimidate you Friday night isn't the same guy sitting in that parking lot right now." Before Sarah could respond, the arcade's front door chimed and Tank walked in. But this was a very different version of the man who had confronted her 3 days earlier. Gone was the aggressive swagger and confrontational posture. Instead, Tank moved carefully, almost hesitantly, scanning the room until his eyes found Sarah's. He approached slowly, hands visible and non-threatening, stopping a respectful distance away. The arcade had grown noticeably quieter as other players sensed the potential for drama. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" Tank asked, his voice lacking any of its previous arrogance. "Outside, if you prefer." Sarah evaluated the request, noting the genuine nervousness in Tank's demeanor. Whatever he had learned about her background had clearly affected him profoundly. "Here's fine," she said, gesturing to a nearby seating area away from the gaming machines. They sat across from each other at a small table, the neon lights casting alternating shadows across their faces. Tank fidgeted with his energy drink for several seconds before finding the courage to speak. "I owe you an apology," he began. "A big one. I was way out of line Friday night." Sarah waited for him to continue, offering no encouragement or hostility. "My cousin Marcus served with some special operations guys in Afghanistan," Tank continued. "When I described what happened, he got real serious real fast. Started asking questions about your background, your training, stuff I couldn't answer." Tank paused, taking a sip of his drink before continuing. He made some calls to people he knows. People who know about things I can't even imagine. And what he found out? Tank shook his head. Let's just say I'm lucky you showed restraint. Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral, but internally she was calculating the implications of Tank's investigation. If his cousin had connections deep enough to access classified information about special operations personnel, her anonymity was already compromised. What exactly did he tell you? She asked. Tank hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with sharing information he wasn't supposed to have. Enough to know that you've done things I can't comprehend, places I can't pronounce, missions that probably saved lives I'll never know about. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. He said, the techniques you used on me are taught to people who specialize in eliminating threats quickly and silently. Said you could have seriously hurt me and didn't, which means you have more discipline and control than most people will ever develop. Sarah absorbed this information, realizing that her carefully constructed civilian identity was unraveling faster than she had anticipated. The question now was how to manage the situation without creating bigger problems. Your cousin talks too much, she said finally. Tank actually smiled at this. The first genuine expression she had seen from him. Yeah, he does. But he also made me understand something important. Which is that I've been playing tough guy in a sandbox while you've been fighting real wars against real enemies, Tank said seriously. I've been intimidating gamers and college kids while you've been. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah studied his face, recognizing the genuine remorse and newfound respect in his expression. It was a look she had seen before, usually from junior personnel who had just learned about the reality of special operations work. The person you've been hearing about isn't who I am anymore, she said quietly. I'm just someone trying to play video games and live a normal life. And, Tank nodded emphatically, that's exactly what I want to help you do. The thing is, word's already spreading through the community. People are starting to ask questions, make connections. Your privacy is probably going to be compromised whether we like it or not. Sarah had already reached the same conclusion, but hearing it confirmed still stung. The comfortable anonymity she had maintained for months was evaporating, replaced by unwanted attention and speculation. What are you suggesting? She asked. Tank took a deep breath before answering. I'm suggesting we get ahead of this. Let me make it clear to everyone that you're under my protection here. Not because you need it, obviously, but because you deserve to game in peace without people bothering you. The offer surprised Sarah. Tank was essentially proposing to use his reputation and influence to shield her from exactly the kind of attention his own actions had generated. Why would you do that? She asked. Because I screwed up, Tank replied honestly. Because I let my ego put you in a position you didn't want to be in. And because someone who's served their country the way you have deserves better treatment than what I gave you. Sarah considered the proposal. Tank's protection would come with its own complications. But it might be preferable to dealing with constant speculation and investigation into her background. There would be conditions, she said finally. Name them. No questions about my service. No attempts to research my background further. And if I ask you to back off, you back off immediately. Tank nodded without hesitation. Agreed. Anything else? Sarah almost smiled at the irony of the situation. 3 days ago, this man had been her problem. Now he was offering to become her solution. One more thing, she said. I still get to kick your ass at fighting games whenever I want. This time Tank's smile was genuine and wide. Deal. But I'm going to keep practicing until I can at least make our matches competitive. As they shook hands, Sarah realized that the evening's events had taken yet another unexpected turn. Tank's investigation had destroyed her anonymity, but his guilt and respect had created an unlikely alliance. It wasn't the outcome she had hoped for, but it was better than the alternatives. The arcade gradually returned to normal volume as other players realized the confrontation they had expected wasn't going to materialize. Sarah and Tank returned to their respective gaming setups, but the dynamic between them had fundamentally changed. Over the following weeks, Tank proved true to his word. When curious players approached Sarah with questions about her background, Tank would intervene diplomatically, but firmly. When social media speculation about her identity intensified, Tank used his influence in the community to discourage further investigation. Sarah's gaming sessions remained peaceful, though she could never quite recapture the complete anonymity she had previously enjoyed. The trade-off seemed acceptable, especially as she watched Tank genuinely work to become a better player and a better person. Their relationship evolved from adversarial to respectful to something approaching friendship. Tank never asked about her military service, but his behavior made it clear he understood and appreciated the sacrifices that service had required. Sarah discovered that having an ally in the gaming community, even one she had gained through conflict, made her civilian transition slightly easier. Tank's protection allowed her to focus on rebuilding her life, rather than constantly managing unwanted attention. The battle hub became her sanctuary again, a place where her past remained private, and her future stayed focused on simple pleasures like perfect combos and hard-fought victories. Sometimes the most unexpected conflicts led to the most valuable alliances, and sometimes former enemies made the most loyal friends. The silence that followed the gunshots felt heavier than the weapons Marcus had carried through 3 combat deployments. Military police vehicles surrounded the training area within minutes, their red and blue lights cutting through the morning haze like emergency beacons in his fractured reality. Marcus sat on the ground where Chen had guided him, his hands zip-tied behind his back, watching the controlled chaos unfold around him. Captain Rodriguez, the base military police commander, approached with measured steps. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but Marcus could see the questions forming behind her dark eyes. She had dealt with various incidents during her 15-year career, but never a case involving live fire during a training exercise. Sergeant Riley, I need you to understand that you're being detained for investigation into the discharge of live ammunition during a training exercise, Captain Rodriguez said, crouching down to Marcus's eye level. You have the right to remain silent and the right to legal counsel. Do you understand these rights? Marcus nodded slowly, his voice catching in his throat when he tried to speak. The reality of his situation was crystallizing with each passing moment. The faces of his fellow soldiers showed a mixture of confusion, concern, and fear that cut deeper than any enemy fire he'd experienced overseas. Dr. Martinez was being examined by the base medical team even though she insisted she was unharmed. The 5 rounds had impacted the ground near her position, close enough to spray dirt across her uniform but far enough away to avoid physical injury. Marcus watched the medical evaluation from his position, grateful beyond words that his compromised judgment hadn't resulted in tragedy. Sarah, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened from your perspective, said Colonel Peterson, the base commander, who had arrived to personally oversee the investigation. His 25 years of military experience had prepared him for many situations, but this incident presented unique challenges that would require careful handling. Dr. Martinez accepted a bottle of water from one of the medics and took a moment to collect her thoughts. Her hands showed slight tremors from the adrenaline, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. I was moving toward the casualty collection point as briefed, she explained. The exercise was proceeding normally. I heard the first shot and assumed it was part of the scenario, maybe earlier than scheduled. When I heard the rapid succession of additional shots, I hit the ground as trained. It wasn't until I saw the dirt impacts and heard everyone shouting that I realized something was wrong. Colonel Peterson made notes on his tablet, while Master Sergeant Williams provided additional details about the exercise timeline and safety protocols. The investigation was already revealing that all safety measures had been properly implemented, all participants had been briefed on procedures, and all weapons were supposed to have been loaded with blank ammunition only. Sir, I personally inspected Sergeant Riley's ammunition before the exercise began, Williams reported. Standard procedure was followed. I have no explanation for how live rounds were loaded into his weapon. The ammunition inspection logs would become a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation. Marcus's rifle had been properly cleared and inspected, but somehow 5 live rounds had found their way into his magazine alongside the blank cartridges. The mystery of how this occurred would require detailed forensic analysis and interviews with everyone who had access to the weapons and ammunition. Chen stood nearby, still shaken by his friend's dramatic behavioral change during the incident. The corporal had served with Marcus through some of the most intense fighting of their deployment, but nothing had prepared him for watching his trusted sergeant lose touch with reality during a routine training exercise. "Chen, I need your statement about what you observed before and during the incident," Colonel Peterson said, approaching the young soldier with a gentle but authoritative tone. Chen straightened his posture and began recounting the events with military precision, but his voice carried emotional weight that formal language couldn't hide. "Sir," Sergeant Riley seemed agitated this morning before the exercise began. Not unusual stress, but more than normal. During the exercise, I noticed his breathing became irregular, and his body language suggested extreme stress. When I tried to get his attention, he was looking through his scope and talking about enemy fighters flanking Dr. Martinez's position. The colonel made detailed notes while Chen continued his account. Each detail would be crucial for understanding both the immediate circumstances and the underlying factors that contributed to the incident. I attempted to redirect his attention and explain that we were in a training environment, but he seemed unable to process that information. When I tried physical contact to get his attention, his reaction suggested he was experiencing some form of flashback or episode related to our previous deployment. Chen's statement provided the first clear indication that Marcus's actions might have been the result of combat-related psychological trauma rather than intentional misconduct. This distinction would be crucial for determining the appropriate response and consequences. The base chaplain, Major Thompson, had arrived to provide support for everyone affected by the incident. His experience counseling combat veterans had taught him to recognize the signs of post-traumatic stress and the complex ways it could manifest in unexpected situations. "Colonel, if I may suggest, this situation shows characteristics consistent with a combat stress reaction," Major Thompson offered quietly. "Sergeant Riley's service record shows extensive combat exposure, and the symptoms described by Corporal Chen align with documented cases of traumatic flashbacks." Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the base psychiatrist, was already en route to conduct a preliminary mental health evaluation. Her expertise would be essential for determining Marcus's psychological state and fitness for duty, as well as recommending appropriate treatment options. Marcus remained largely silent during the initial questioning, his mind struggling to process the gap between his perceived reality during the flashback and the actual events that had occurred. The weight of potential consequences pressed down on him like the gear he'd carried through Afghan mountains. "Marcus," Captain Rodriguez said gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need you to help me understand what you were thinking when you fired those shots. Your cooperation could be important for the investigation and for getting you the help you might need." Marcus raised his head to meet her eyes for the first time since being detained. His voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke. "I thought I was back in Afghanistan. I saw enemy fighters moving to attack Dr. Martinez, just like what happened to Staff Sergeant Kim during our deployment. I thought I was protecting her from the same fate." The reference to Staff Sergeant Kim immediately caught Captain Rodriguez's attention. She made a note to request Marcus's deployment records and after-action reports from his unit's activities in Afghanistan. Understanding the specific traumatic events that triggered his flashback would be crucial for both the investigation and his treatment. Colonel Peterson conferred quietly with the military police commander and the chaplain, discussing the delicate balance between maintaining military discipline and addressing the obvious mental health factors involved in the incident. The case would require coordination between multiple departments and careful consideration of both accountability and treatment. The investigation team began processing the scene methodically, collecting evidence, including the spent brass casings, impact sites, and detailed measurements of bullet trajectories. The forensic analysis would provide objective data to supplement the witness statements and help reconstruct the exact sequence of events. Dr. Martinez approached Colonel Peterson after completing her medical evaluation, her expression thoughtful rather than accusatory. "Sir, I'd like to request that Sergeant Riley receive proper mental health evaluation and support," she said. "As a medical professional, I can see that this incident wasn't the result of malicious intent, but rather a psychological crisis that requires treatment, not just punishment." Her statement surprised many of the soldiers present, who had expected anger or demands for harsh disciplinary action. Instead, "Doctor, Martinez demonstrated the same commitment to healing that had drawn her to military medicine, recognizing that Marcus was as much a casualty of war as any wounded soldier she might treat. The base legal officer, Major Carson, arrived to begin preliminary legal consultations. The case would require careful analysis of military law, regulations regarding training incidents, and precedents for handling combat stress-related situations. The complexity of the legal issues would likely take weeks or months to fully resolve. Sergeant Riley will be held in the base detention facility pending completion of the investigation, Major Carson announced. Given the circumstances and the mental health factors involved, we'll be requesting expedited psychiatric evaluation and considering various legal and administrative options. As Marcus was transported to the detention facility, Chen watched his friend disappear into the back of the military police vehicle. The sight triggered his own memories of their shared experiences in combat, the bonds forged under fire, and the invisible wounds they had all carried home from war. The training ground, which had been busy with military activity just hours earlier, now stood empty, except for the evidence markers and investigation team. The targets remained in their positions, waiting for a training exercise that would never resume. The carefully planned scenario had been replaced by a real-world crisis that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Dr. Hayes arrived at the base as the initial investigation concluded. Her first priority would be conducting a comprehensive mental health evaluation of Marcus, assessing his current psychological state, and developing recommendations for treatment. The evaluation would also help determine whether his actions were the result of a temporary crisis or indicated ongoing mental health issues that required extended intervention. The ripple effects of the incident extended far beyond the immediate participants. The entire base community would need to process what had happened, examine their own understanding of combat stress, and potentially revise training protocols to prevent similar occurrences in the future. News of the incident began spreading through military channels, reaching commanders and officials who would need to make decisions about policies, procedures, and resources for addressing combat-related mental health issues. The case would likely become a catalyst for broader discussions about veteran care and the transition from combat to peacetime service. Chen completed his detailed statement and was released to return to his unit, but the experience had changed him fundamentally. Watching his trusted sergeant lose touch with reality had shattered his own sense of security and forced him to confront the possibility that the same psychological wounds might be affecting him as well. The investigation would continue for weeks, involving interviews with dozens of personnel, analysis of equipment and procedures, and review of policies and protocols. But the immediate crisis had passed, leaving behind questions about accountability, treatment, and prevention that would challenge the military's approach to caring for its wounded warriors. As evening approached, Fort Braxton returned to its normal routine, but the morning's events had left an invisible scar on the community. The 5 shots that Marcus had fired in a moment of psychological crisis would echo through policy discussions, legal proceedings, and treatment programs for years to come. Marcus sat alone in his detention cell, the events of the morning playing repeatedly through his mind with painful clarity. The heroic rescue he thought he was performing had been revealed as a dangerous delusion, and the weight of that realization threatened to crush what remained of his sense of self-worth and purpose. 6 months had passed since the incident at Fort Braxton's training ground, and Marcus Riley sat across from Dr. Elizabeth Hayes in the bright, comfortable office that had become his sanctuary and confessional. The military detention facility had been replaced by intensive outpatient treatment. But the real prison had always been in his mind. "Tell me about the nightmares this week," Dr. Hayes said, her pen poised over the notebook that contained months of careful documentation about Marcus's recovery journey. Marcus shifted in the leather chair that no longer felt foreign to him. The weekly sessions had become a lifeline, a structured space where he could confront the demons that had nearly destroyed his life and the lives of others. "They're different now," Marcus said, his voice carrying a strength that had been absent during their early sessions. "Instead of just seeing Staff Sergeant Kim getting killed, I see myself firing those shots at Dr. Martinez. I wake up knowing that I could have killed an innocent person because I couldn't tell the difference between past and present." The honesty in his words reflected months of difficult therapeutic work. "Doctor," Hayes had guided him through the complex process of understanding how combat trauma could hijack the mind's ability to distinguish between real and imagined threats. The journey had been painful but necessary for his recovery. Dr. Hayes made notes while Marcus continued, his hands no longer shaking when he discussed the incident. The tremors that had persisted for weeks after his arrest had gradually subsided as he learned to manage his anxiety and process his traumatic memories. The investigation concluded that you had no conscious intent to harm anyone, Dr. Hayes reminded him. The Board of Inquiry found that your actions were the direct result of combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically a dissociative flashback episode triggered by environmental factors that resembled your traumatic experiences in Afghanistan. Quote, the official findings had taken 3 months to complete, involving extensive interviews, psychological evaluations, and review of Marcus's military service record. The investigation had revealed a pattern of increasing psychological distress that had gone unrecognized and untreated since his return from deployment. That doesn't change what happened, Marcus replied. I put live rounds in my rifle and fired them at another soldier. The fact that I thought I was protecting her doesn't make it less dangerous, or less wrong. His acceptance of responsibility had been crucial for his recovery. Dr. Hayes had seen many patients who remained stuck in denial or blame, unable to move forward with treatment. Marcus's willingness to confront his actions honestly, even when they were the result of psychological illness, had accelerated his healing process. The door to the office opened quietly, and Dr. Martinez entered with a gentle smile. The weekly joint sessions had been her idea, a therapeutic approach that had surprised everyone with its effectiveness. Instead of avoiding each other, the two had chosen to face the incident together. How are you feeling about today's session, Doctor? Martinez asked Marcus as she settled into the chair beside him. 6 months earlier, such proximity would have triggered intense anxiety and guilt. Now, Marcus could meet her eyes without drowning in shame. Nervous but ready, Marcus admitted. Dr. Hayes thinks I'm prepared to discuss returning to limited duty. But I'm not sure I trust my own judgment about my mental state. Dr. Martinez nodded with understanding. Her own journey had included therapy to process the trauma of being fired upon by a fellow soldier. Even though she hadn't been physically harmed, the incident had forced her to confront her own vulnerability and mortality in ways that medical training hadn't prepared her for. Your judgment has improved significantly, Dr. Hayes observed. The fact that you question your own perceptions shows growth and self-awareness. 6 months ago, you were completely unable to distinguish between flashback memories and present reality. Now you're hypervigilant about your mental state, which is actually a positive development in your recovery. The treatment program had included medication to manage Marcus's anxiety and depression, but the real work had been psychological. Cognitive behavioral therapy had helped him understand how trauma changes brain function, while exposure therapy had gradually reduced his hypersensitive responses to triggers. I've been thinking about Staff Sergeant Kim a lot lately, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the topic. Not the way he died, but the way he lived. He would have wanted me to get help, to heal, and to find a way to serve again if possible. Dr. Martinez reached over and briefly touched Marcus's hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable in the early days of treatment. The physical contact represented trust, rebuilt, and fear conquered through consistent therapeutic work. Robert would be proud of the progress you've made, she said, using Kim's first name in a way that honored his memory without being trapped by the trauma of his death. He dedicated his life to helping others heal, and in many ways, your recovery continues his mission. The relationship between Marcus and Dr. Martinez had evolved into something unprecedented in military medicine. Rather than remaining adversaries or strangers connected by tragedy, they had become partners in healing. Her forgiveness and support had been instrumental in his recovery, while his progress had helped her process her own trauma. Colonel Peterson had authorized the unusual therapeutic arrangement after consulting with military lawyers and mental health professionals. The case had become a model for innovative approaches to treating combat stress and rebuilding trust within military units affected by psychological casualties. The board has recommended that you be allowed to return to limited duty with continued psychological monitoring, Dr. Hayes announced, reading from an official document that had arrived that morning. You would be assigned to training and administrative duties, With no access to weapons or combat-related activities for at least 1 year, Marcus absorbed the information slowly, his emotions cycling between relief, gratitude, and lingering self-doubt. The possibility of serving again, even in a limited capacity, represented validation that he was more than his worst moment. "What about Dr. Martinez?" Marcus asked. "Has the board considered how my return might affect her ability to serve effectively?" His concern for her well-being demonstrated the empathy and perspective that had returned gradually during treatment. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, Marcus had been so consumed by self-recrimination that he couldn't focus on anyone else's needs. "I requested to be involved in your reintegration process," Dr. Martinez said with a smile. "If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to continue our joint therapy sessions and potentially work together on developing new protocols for identifying and treating combat stress in returning veterans." The proposal surprised Marcus, who had assumed that Dr. Martinez would want to avoid any reminder of the incident. Her willingness to transform their shared trauma into a force for positive change represented the kind of healing that textbooks described but rarely achieved. Chen had visited regularly during Marcus's treatment, their friendship surviving the strain of the incident and investigations. The young corporal had also entered counseling to address his own combat-related stress. Recognizing that the warning signs had been present in both of them, "Chen wants to know if you're ready for him to visit during duty hours rather than just personal time," Dr. Hayes said, checking her notes about Marcus's support network. "He's been promoted to sergeant and assigned to the base mental health awareness program." The news brought genuine joy to Marcus's face for the first time in months. Chen's promotion represented validation that speaking up about mental health concerns wouldn't destroy a military career. An important message for other soldiers struggling with similar issues. "I'd like that," Marcus said. "Chen probably saved my life by taking my rifle away after I fired those shots. He deserves recognition for his quick thinking and loyalty." The incident had indeed highlighted Chen's courage and judgment under pressure. Rather than facing disciplinary action for not immediately reporting Marcus's erratic behavior, Chen had been commended for his attempt to de-escalate the situation and his honest testimony during the investigation. Dr. Hayes closed her notebook and looked at both of her patients with professional satisfaction and personal pride. The case had challenged conventional approaches to military mental health treatment and produced outcomes that exceeded everyone's expectations. "I want you both to understand how remarkable your progress has been," she said. "This incident could have destroyed 2 careers, damaged trust within your unit, and reinforced stigma about mental health treatment. Instead, it's become a catalyst for positive change that will benefit countless other veterans." The treatment program developed for Marcus had been adopted by other military bases dealing with similar cases. The joint therapy approach with Dr. Martinez had proven so effective that it was being studied for potential implementation in civilian trauma treatment programs. Master Sergeant Williams had also played a crucial role in the positive outcome, using the incident as a teaching moment for his training staff, rather than simply implementing punitive measures. The ammunition loading procedures had been revised to include additional safety checks, and all training personnel had received enhanced education about recognizing signs of combat stress. "What happens next?" Marcus asked, the question carrying weight beyond immediate logistical concerns. He was really asking about his future, his purpose, and his ability to rebuild a meaningful life after nearly destroying everything he valued. "Next, we continue the work," Dr. Hayes replied. "Recovery from trauma isn't a destination, but an ongoing process. You'll return to duty gradually, continue therapy sessions, and probably face setbacks and challenges. But you've proven that you can confront your demons and emerge stronger." Dr. Martinez stood to leave, her own therapy session scheduled to continue privately. Before departing, she turned back to Marcus with an expression of genuine warmth and respect. "Thank you for being brave enough to do this work," she said. "Your healing has been part of mine. When you fired those shots, you were trying to save someone you thought was in danger. In the end, by getting help and facing your trauma, you probably saved more lives than you realize." After she left, Marcus and Dr. Hayes concluded their session with planning for his transition back to active duty. The process would be gradual and carefully monitored. But for the first time since the incident, Marcus felt hope about his future. Walking across the base toward his temporary quarters, Marcus passed the training ground where his life had changed forever. The area looked peaceful in the late afternoon sunlight, with no trace of the chaos and fear that had erupted there 6 months earlier. He paused at the spot where he had fired those 5 terrible shots, remembering the helpless confusion and the crushing weight of realization that had followed. But now, instead of shame and self-hatred, he felt something approaching forgiveness for himself and gratitude for the second chance he had been given. The evening formation was beginning across the base, soldiers falling into ranks for the daily ritual that marked the transition from work to personal time. Marcus couldn't participate yet, but soon he would rejoin that community of service, carrying with him hard-won wisdom about the invisible wounds of war. His phone buzzed with a text message from Chen. "Heard about your clearance for duty. Ready to get back to work, Sergeant?" Marcus smiled as he typed his response. Ready to serve again. Differently but better. The 5 shots that had nearly ended his career had instead become the beginning of a new chapter. One written with honesty about the cost of war and hope about the possibility of healing. The field medic he had tried to save in his traumatic delusion had instead saved him through forgiveness, understanding, and the courage to transform tragedy into triumph.